The story of a Serbian sniper, when yellow becomes the color of blood. Dude, war is terrible shit. People do things they normally wouldn't be capable of at all. I sometimes wonder if war shows the true face of man, or if people simply adapt to their environment and become beasts worse than the cruelest demons. There's nothing more terrifying than another human being. You all know I'm from Bosnia. Fortunately, my family and I moved just before the war, but most of our friends stayed behind. I returned there right after the conflict ended. I saw only horror and destruction, ruined cities, poverty, hunger. The Serbs claim they are the victims. Muslims believe they suffered the most severe losses. Croats call for justice for those who committed crimes against them. The sad truth is that everyone screwed up, without exception. One evening I met up with my uncle, who, like me, was a Serb. He also had many buddies, most of whom had taken part in the war. That night we were drinking in a bar with one of them. We sat down at a table. When the bartender brought us 3 glasses and a bottle of Jack Daniels, I knew it was going to be intense. I'm a pretty big guy, 195 centimeters, 105 kilograms, so I can handle quite a bit. But my uncle and his buddy were throwing back shots in a way that was beyond my capabilities. My uncle's buddy was named Mijo. He was about 185 centimeters tall and looked to weigh around 120 kilograms. Just a big piece of man. The type of guy you don't want to mess with. Broad shoulders, a beer belly, and the face of a man who had seen a lot in life. He had a raspy voice, partly because he smoked 2 packs of Marlboros a day, and partly because he almost shouted when he spoke. However, he seemed to be a pretty nice guy, and together with my uncle, they made for good company, where downing a few glasses, or bottles, of whiskey seemed like a good idea. At first we talked about various things: women, money, politics, women again, sports, and women once more. After some time we started talking about the inevitable topic in this country, the war. We expressed our political views. By the time the first bottle was showing its bottom, I was finishing my lecture on armed conflicts. I said it was one of the most terrifying experiences a person can have, because either you die or you live in constant fear for your life. If you happen to survive. Mijo slammed his glass on the table, nearly shattering it to pieces. As I finished speaking, "What the hell do you know about war?" he asked almost angrily. "I know what I see: death, destruction, regression." I tried to sound well-read. "Hey, look at your nephew," Mijo replied, turning to my uncle. Perfect material for a CNN presenter and telling their fairy tales. My uncle laughed as a second bottle of liquor appeared on the table. "Maybe I'll tell him about that night." Mijo spoke up as if I wasn't there with them. "Good idea," my uncle replied, pouring himself a full glass. Mijo turned to face me. He looked serious. It wasn't the kind of drunken seriousness, but real seriousness. Interestingly, the tone of his voice lowered to a normal one that we hear from people. "Listen, kid, I'll tell you what happened to me in '94. Believe me, you wouldn't see this on CNN or on the internet. But I don't even watch CNN, I just thought that." "Listen to him," my uncle interjected. "Listen and remember, war isn't just weapons and death. There's a whole lot of other shit there too." "Like what exactly?" I asked, grabbing the glass full of liquor. "Just listen," my uncle replied, lighting a cigarette. Listening to this story always scares the shit out of me. When I was a kid, I loved playing with wooden replicas of swords or guns, pretending to fight with my buddies. Who would have thought that many years later I'd be fighting those same buddies, but instead of a wooden replica, I'd have a real gun in my hand? Who would have thought? When the war started, we were mobilized very quickly. The Serbs gathered all men capable of fighting, and the Muslims did the same. Sarajevo quickly divided based on views, so regular shooting began. I was in a small 13-person unit in the northern district of the city. Most of my unit were normal people. They had normal lives, jobs, families. Half of them didn't even know how to properly hold a gun. I, on the other hand, had military training. I was trained as a sniper, so I commanded the unit. I won't tell you the details of the actual skirmishes. You've probably read about it in your beloved CNN or on the internet. It's war. We kill, they kill, nobody wins. Believe me, I had no problem shooting people because I knew that if I didn't, they would kill me. For the first year and a half, my unit grew significantly. We were known for our ruthlessness and effectiveness. Soon our reputation provided us with a certain immunity because everyone was afraid of us. For the first 18 months, I prematurely ended many lives. However, in September 93, orders came from above, orders I hated. The Serbs had heard rumors that a small Muslim village near the capital was helping enemy units, supplying them with food and other goods, and offering accommodation. The higher-ups wanted us to send them a message that said anyone who helps Muslims will be punished. I hate hunting civilians, but I didn't want to refuse to follow orders either. When we arrived at the village, we saw that it was barely more than a backwater, 10, maybe 11 houses. As soon as we entered, the residents gathered around us. "What do you want from us? We have nothing," someone shouted from the crowd. Back off, damn it," I yelled. I only had 7 men with me, and there were about 20 residents, so I had to ensure our safety. "What do you want?" one of the villagers asked again. "You know what we want. Tell us where they're hiding," I shouted back, wanting to speed up the whole process. "We're not hiding anyone, leave us alone." I was starting to lose my temper. The crowd seemed to be getting closer to us, condensing. Then someone touched my back. Suddenly all the anger evaporated from me, giving way to an absolute survival instinct. Without thinking, I turned around and pulled the trigger. Shoot first, ask questions later. That's how we were taught. My AK spat out a few bullets, and everyone threw themselves flat on the ground. Everyone except the person who touched me. It was a young woman holding a tiny child. I was terrified that I had just shot her. She was wearing a yellow dress. She stood there in front of me, completely shocked. I thought that maybe by some miracle I had missed. However, her dress gradually began to take on a red color. She was still standing, motionless, with her mouth open, I think due to shock. That's when I saw it. I had hit the child. One of the bullets had hit the little one in the eye and traveled further into the brain. The kid wasn't moving. Instant death, I thought. The woman began to gradually regain consciousness. She looked at the dead child. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I thought that someone was attacking me. I couldn't find the right words. I didn't know what to say. I had killed a child in front of its mother. No, everything's fine with him, said the woman, laying the child on the ground. See, he's just sleeping. I'm sorry, really. I'm very, very sorry. I didn't mean to. At this moment, the crowd began to gather around the dead child. They realized what I had done. Fury was pouring out of their faces. You killed a child. You'll pay for this. These and similar shouts were coming from the village residents, slowly walking in our direction. My unit backed up a few steps, and the villagers were coming towards us, faster and faster. Everyone, except for the woman whose child I had shot. She was kneeling and stroking the lifeless head of the little one. Back off for fuck's sake, I shouted. Back off, or we'll start shooting, I swear to God." Nothing helped. They were too consumed by the desire for revenge. I did what I had to do for the safety of my unit. Fire. It all lasted maybe 20 seconds. 17 villagers were lying on the ground. You could hear choking, crying, someone choking on blood. After 2 minutes, there was absolute silence. All dead. Except for that woman in the yellow dress, who was still hugging her child's body. At one point she stood up. Her dress was now more red than yellow. She was smiling, and not a single tear was coming from her eyes. She took a step in our direction. "Stop! Stop right now!" I shouted at her. Still she walked. She posed no threat, so I lowered my weapon. She came very close. She directed her hand towards my face, not in a threatening manner. It looked more like a blind person trying to learn the features of someone's face. But she didn't touch me. One of my men ran up to her and hit her hard in the face, so hard that she fell to the ground. "Boss, let's get the fuck out of here as fast as possible. The Inaaace might show up soon." He grabbed my arm. I think I was still in shock. The woman got up. She smiled again. Blood was flowing from her mouth, and she was missing a tooth in her lower jaw. She started whistling, or rather she tried to, because I guess you can't do that with knocked out teeth and a mouth full of blood. Everyone deals with such shock differently. Some cry, others stand paralyzed. We've even seen people breaking into hysterical laughter moments before death. But man, this woman, this was something completely different. She started dancing. A mother whose child had just been murdered, in a dress covered in blood, was dancing around the fresh bodies of her loved ones, whistling. We decided we'd had enough. We left that place as quickly as possible. Being about half a kilometer away from the village, I looked back one last time to see the horror I had caused. The sight was terrifying, even for me. The whole village was eerily quiet. No sound. I only saw that woman dancing among the corpses. It was the strangest thing I had ever seen. We left and never talked about that situation again. I thought I could forget about it all, that I'd throw it into the bag, labeled war, and that war would become the excuse for all these atrocities. And I even managed to do it, until December 24th, 1994. December 24th, as you probably know, is Christmas Eve. For us and for the Muslims, it didn't mean much, but the Croats celebrated this holiday. Even in the turmoil of war, we had respect for others' holidays. No one attacked us during our holidays. Catholics were not harassed during Christmas and Easter. Muslims were safe during Ramadan. It's funny that in inhuman times, people sometimes try to behave humanely. My unit took a position on a hill near Sarajevo. The location was perfect. We had an excellent view of the entire city, and the building where I was stationed was an excellent spot for a sniper. Every day, the Muslim army lost several or a dozen soldiers, thanks to me. Due to the Catholic Christmas Eve, I sent my men to a nearby village to get some sleep. We weren't expecting any action that night. Personally, I felt very rested then, so I volunteered to keep watch in the building. I had my trusty AK and a sniper rifle with me. A bottle of whiskey, captured the previous day, added sweetness. It was a quiet, cold night. I had a comfortable bench in front of the window, so I sat there all the time, monitoring the surroundings. I used snow to cool the drink. I know it's barbaric, but hell, it was war then. Around 3 a.m, the bottle was already half empty. I'd like to mention here that I wasn't drunk at all. Oh no. It takes much, much more to befuddle old Mijo. Sipping the alcohol, I realized something was wrong. It was very, very quiet. I know, holidays, temporary ceasefire, but that wasn't it. I went outside for a moment to check, but I couldn't see anything, just snow. So I went back inside and grabbed the glass, but I drank much slower and was much more careful. After a few hours, I must have dozed off a bit because I was awakened by a loud bang, an explosion, in the city. Nothing that should concern me. Probably some Serb blew up a car to ruin the Croats' holiday. Despite the fact that the explosion shouldn't concern me, I doubled my vigilance. I talked briefly with Valdo, a colleague from the unit, on the walkie-talkie. He said everything was fine on their end. Apart from the echo of the explosion, silence and calm. So I relaxed a bit, but after a while I heard something. I got up and quietly opened the window. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't gunshots either. The sound resembled whistling. I wasn't sure if I was just cold or if a shiver ran down my spine. I mean, I've been through a lot in my life, but this was something that went beyond my experiences. Imagine, you're sitting alone at home, it's night, no lights are on, and you hear whistling. And it's not ordinary whistling. It was a melody I had heard over a year ago, from the mother of the child I accidentally shot. The chances of it being the same woman were none. At least that's what I thought. Over a year had passed since those events, so I was sure the woman had either gone completely crazy or died. Nevertheless, that whistling worried me a lot. "Who's there?" I shouted. "Show yourself, or fuck off, or I'll start shooting." No answer, but at least the whistling stopped. I listened carefully. I heard something else. Footsteps. Someone was walking in the snow. At first the steps were slow, then suddenly they sped up, only to slow down again after a moment. It wasn't a person walking around the house. This someone was dancing. I wasn't sure what to do. Should I go out and check who was making that noise, or stay inside? But I knew one thing. I had to call for backup. I tried to contact Valdo, my best buddy from the unit, but at first he didn't respond. Strange. I had talked to him just a few minutes earlier. I started setting the device to a different frequency and finally made contact. I told him to come as quickly as possible. I had a total flood of thoughts. The most serious problem was that I was sitting in complete darkness. Then, I remembered that I had illuminating flares upstairs. I ran for them as fast as if my life depended on it and pulled the flares out of the box. For the first time in a while, a smile appeared on my face. 4 flares in the box and 1 in the gun made 5 flares in total. Should be enough. To save time, I went to the window upstairs, wanting to fire a flare. I also realized that the sounds of footsteps and dancing had stopped. Nevertheless, I wanted to illuminate my surroundings a bit. The house was quite isolated. There were no other buildings around, except for a tool shed about 20 meters away. I aimed towards the road leading to the house and fired. The flare immediately illuminated the surroundings. It was red, but the visibility left nothing to be desired. I didn't see anyone, but I noticed footprints in the snow. They were everywhere, around the house, on the road, everywhere. I even saw traces in front of the window where I was sitting. Damn, it looked like whoever was walking here had stood in front of me, and I hadn't seen them. Then I saw a trail leading to the shed. I followed it with my eyes. She was standing there. She was wearing a yellow dress, mostly stained with blood. Without a doubt, it was the same woman whose child I had shot over a year ago. She was standing on the roof of the shed, just looking at me. Just looking, nothing more. "What the fuck do you want, huh?" I shouted through the window. She didn't answer, she didn't move, she just stood there, staring straight at me. I noticed that the flare had almost burned out, but before it did, the woman fell from the shed roof. She didn't jump, I'm sure of that. She just seemed to fall into the darkness. As at that moment the flare went out, the whistling started again. I was totally stunned. You know, every time I tell someone this story, I try to emphasize the absurdity of the whole situation. Think about it. You're alone in a dark building, and your most irrational and illogical fear of being found by the mother of your youngest victim comes true. Moreover, the mother seems to be even crazier than before. I grabbed the walkie-talkie and shouted, "Valdo, where the fuck are you, huh?" "I'm coming, man, I'm coming." "God, is everything okay?" I heard. "Everything is fucking not okay. Move your ass." I had to start thinking logically. Surely this strange situation could be explained. Let's say it was the same woman, I thought. Let's say she found me. What can she possibly do? Actually, nothing. But what if she brought some people with her? I hoped Valdo would really hurry up. I went downstairs, taking the remaining flares with me. I approached the window, set up the rifle, and prepared to illuminate the surroundings again. I aimed up and fired. I can now honestly say that it was one of the stupidest ideas that could have come to my mind then. As soon as the flare illuminated the area with its red light, I saw something more horrible than all the sights from the war put together. I saw the woman holding a child. She was standing about 10 meters from the house. She was holding a kid who looked very much like my youngest victim. The flare fell a meter in front of her, giving her dress an even bloodier color, as if the blood-soaked material wasn't terrifying enough. She didn't even flinch. She did something worse. She started singing a lullaby to the child. I didn't know what to do, but I knew one thing. This couldn't be the same child. That one was dead. It got a bullet in the head, for Christ's sake. The flare went out. I picked up the walkie-talkie, trying to talk to Valdo and ask where the fuck he was. No answer. Great. 3 flares left. I prepared the rifle. Well, if the woman wants to die, I won't stop her. I fired the 3rd flare, but I must have aimed badly due to nerves. It hit the window frame, bounced off and fell in front of me. I caught it with my hand and threw it towards the woman. She was still standing in place. This time, however, she was holding the child with one hand. She leaned down and with her free hand picked up the flare, illuminating everything around her. I dropped the rifle. A group of people was standing behind her. I was sure it was a Muslim unit, ready for revenge. But after a moment I started to recognize them. These were the people we had coldly shot in that village over a year ago. I saw their faces, illuminated by that damn red flare. They were all bloody. Some had visible wounds, others didn't. But I had no doubt these were the same people I had ordered to be shot, worrying about the unit's safety. I picked up the rifle and aimed at one of them. The flare went out, but I still fired a shot. I grabbed the radio and started yelling. I didn't hear any response. It was just me and a group of people we had killed long ago. I was on my own. In such situations, there's no time for logical thinking. I mean, I'm not a very religious person, and I don't believe in any ghosts, apparitions, zombies, or other stories, but I couldn't find an explanation for this situation. People who should have been lying in the ground long ago were standing in front of me. I decided I would try to kill them for the 2nd time. 2 flares, well, I fired the 4th one. They were all still standing there. The woman was walking left and right, in front of the army of the undead. Her lullaby was getting louder. At one point, she was almost shouting the words, still walking in front of the reanimated. I will never forget the words of that lullaby. At some terrifying moment, I decided to end this absurdity in the only way I knew: violence. I aimed at the man standing on the edge. He was older, short, and was missing part of his head. He must have been hit with a shotgun that night, over a year ago. I pulled the trigger. He got it straight in the chest, around the heart area. He fell, dead, making no sounds. The woman stopped singing, stopped and looked at me, shocked. Her mouth was open very wide. She started making a strange sound. It wasn't a scream, just a low, very low, continuous sound. I pressed the trigger again, and again. Each time I hit one of them, the sound made by the woman was higher and louder. At one point, only 3 were still standing: her child, and some guy to her left. She was making sounds like a stabbed person. Something like that stays in your head forever. If you've ever heard what sounds a dying person makes, you'll always recognize them afterwards. I aimed. Another shot was fired. The man on the left fell. It was just me and her left, and her child. Her screech was unbearable. It drilled through my ears into my brain, and, as if, tore at my already heavily rattled soul. But I couldn't force myself to shoot her. I don't know what it was about. Maybe it was the guilt I still had in me, which will remain with me for the rest of my life. The flare went out. Radio, where the hell was Valdo? No answer. At least the scream was over. But after a while I realized that the silence was probably even worse. I stood in the icy darkness, trying to pierce the gloom in front of me with my eyes. I heard approaching footsteps. Fuck, I'm firing the last flare. I aimed the gun at the sky, muttered a hasty prayer, and fired. The light of the flare revealed to my eyes the most terrifying horror I had ever seen. The child I had accidentally shot a year ago was standing in front of my window. I fell backwards, mortally terrified. Blood was flowing from its eye, but it didn't seem to be causing it pain. It just stood in front of my window, smiling. While I was trying to recover from the sudden panic attack, I noticed the flare falling behind the child. It must have fallen deep into the snow because it immediately went out. Darkness covered everything, and I wasn't sure if I felt safer. Driven by a sudden impulse, some primal reflex, I grabbed the AK in my hands and opened fire. The first shots illuminated the space in front of me, enough for me to see that the dead child had disappeared from in front of my window. Nevertheless, I didn't stop pressing the trigger until the magazine was empty. I hoped my bullets had hit the undead target. I stood in front of the window, breathing heavily and trying to listen. There was nothing to hear. Silence. I had fired all the flares. No lighting. I decided to wait until sunrise to assess the surroundings. Maybe by that time, that bastard Valdo would deign to show up. The next 2 hours were the longest in my life. I was extremely scared. Trying to catch any sound, I heard nothing. Whatever it was, whoever they were gone now. Or I had killed them. Once again, the darkness of night slowly gave way to the grey of morning. The sun was slowly ascending the sky. I went outside to look at everything. I was looking for the bodies of the undead I had shot at a few hours earlier. I found nothing. Exhausted, both mentally and physically, I fell to my knees. I tried to convince myself that I had simply gotten drunk, that it was just a dream, hallucinations from exhaustion. However, it was incredibly difficult because there were footprints imprinted in the snow, even those in front of my window. I was about to leave the village and get to my people as quickly as possible, when I noticed red spots on the snow. Just behind the tool shed, I came closer. Blood. I felt relief mixed with fear. Relief because I knew I hadn't gone crazy. Someone really had visited me last night. Fear, well, for the same reason. Walking towards the shed, I noticed traces suggesting that something had been dragged there, or as if someone had been shot and crawled in that direction. I looked behind the shed and my heart broke. Valdo. Fuck. I had shot my buddy. I tried all methods of resuscitation. I probably don't need to add that none of them worked. He had been dead for a long time. He had taken at least 6 bullets. I was angry at myself, furious at him. How could he come to the house without warning, not responding on the radio? I tried to explain it to myself, to take the guilt off myself, but ultimately I accepted it. Valdo was dead because of me. However, I didn't understand one thing. He didn't have a radio with him. I took mine out of my pocket and said, "Hello," to check if I could hear it somewhere nearby. Maybe my dead friend had dropped it when I shot him. Silence. I changed the frequency. "Hello, boss." The voice coming from the walkie-talkie was like a bucket of cold water and restored my normal reasoning. "Hello, who's there?" "Who the fuck is there?" I yelled. "Sasha, boss. From your unit." "What the fuck are you doing with the radio? Why didn't Valdo take it yesterday?" I shouted angrily. "I'm sorry, boss. I had it with me all night. It was my turn." "What do you mean all night?" "Around midnight I talked to Valdo. I told him to come." "I'm sorry, boss. I didn't take it out of my pocket once. Valdo was tired and went to sleep early. That's why I had the watch. If you're fucking with me, I swear I'll..." "Boss, did you drink too much Jack yesterday or what?" He interrupted me. "Valdo is dead," I said calmly. "What?" Sasha roared. "He's dead. I shot him. I heard someone moving around the building and I fired. He didn't warn me." "God, we're on our way already. Hang in there." Exhausted, broken, angry and sad, I fell to my knees next to the cold body of my friend. I pressed the radio to my chest and started crying. Then I heard a sound coming from the walkie-talkie. I started changing the frequency again, a continuous sound, uninterrupted. After a while it turned into whistling. If you appreciate my work, subscribe and press the bell. Comment what should I read next and share this video. This is very important for me. In the meantime, we'll hear from each other again soon.